Hey everyone, thank you for joining this week's episode of Soundbites. Today we got a really special guest, Professor Dan Dahlen. So, professor at Ohio University, founder of branding strategy, branding agency Dahlen Communications, worked for basically all the brands that you interact with every single day, which is pretty amazing. Hopefully we can get a chance to talk about maybe a few of those specific iconic brands as we go. And we're really, really excited to have you on. Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate it. How are you today?
Outstanding, Derek. I appreciate it, Lauren. Appreciate the invite. Excited to be with you guys today. Looking forward to it.
Well, we're really pumped to have you here. We got an intro to you through one of our mutual friends, John Mark Bolton,
Mm-hmm.
and we were really excited. We had the intro meeting, we were chatting through, and I was like, man, I love this guy's story. I don't even know if we're going to be able to get it within the 45 minutes, but we're going to absolutely try, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, well, it's a
So
40 plus year career, so it's
maybe a minute per year. Let's see if we can knock
That's
it
right,
out.
Lauren. That's right.
Well, tell us a little bit about, where you came from. That's typically how we start the podcast, is sort of your background
Sure.
and how you got into the industry.
So it started right here in Columbus, which is where I'm sitting, Columbus, Ohio. I was born and raised in a place called Upper Arlington, great community, Northwest Columbus. And after I graduated from Upper Arlington High School, I ended up playing a little football in college, went down to Eastern Kentucky, transferred to Ohio University, and played a little football, and then decided to major in advertising, of all things. I started as a business major, took a couple of accounting courses and said, I don't think this is going to work. I ran across the street to the journalism school, discovered Ad Age magazine, and discovered the whole world of advertising kind of on my own with the help of my advisor. And boom, majored in advertising, graduated, and 2 weeks later, I was working for an ad agency here in Columbus on the McDonald's business, the local business. And I was in it, Lauren, for the next 35 years. Had an incredible run. And, both most ad agency, in fact, I wrote it down, 23 years of my 35 on the agency side, 9 of it on the client side, all with fast food chains. And then I ended my corporate career in New York City with Nielsen in advertising research, which was a great way to kind of cap things off. And it enabled me to kind of evaluate, am I going to end it here, or am I going to, maybe start an encore career, which I decided to do, which of course ended up being teaching at my alma mater. So I was able to get a position on the business faculty, teaching marketing. And I've been doing that now for the last 8 years and, headed into my 9th. So it's been an incredible career. I never dreamt that it would, last this long. I never dreamt that it would take kind of the route that it took. But I've been very blessed and worked for some great companies, as Derek said, on some incredible brands. And it's been just a thrill.
Tell us about that first time you saw Ad Age magazine, because I remember the first time I read it. That's an industry trade pub for folks not in advertising. So what interested you about that, and how did that sort of kickstart your career? What hooked you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I was in the journalism school, which is a great school. Ohio University Journalism School is very renowned, and but back then and even today, that really kind of focus on the TV, radio, and newspaper reporting kind of angle of it. And my advisor said, "Hey, you should start reading this magazine. It's called Ad Age, and it talks about the advertising business." And he said, "I think that might be an industry that you would be suited for. So you should start reading." So I started reading it and reading about ad agencies, which they didn't really talk about in class, to be honest with you. And I just thought that sounded fascinating. And so these are the people that are doing the ads that I'm seeing on TV, hearing on radio, seeing up on outdoor boards. Oh, so I get it. So they're like an outside resource to a company like McDonald's, to a company like Coca-Cola. And so I made it my business to understand the advertising agency business a little bit more. And believe it or not, I just decided, that's what I want to do. And I just kept reading Ad Age and kept getting more excited and more intrigued with what I was reading. And so as I got towards the end of my college career, I started sending letters and resumes to these ad agencies. And, if you read Ad Age, in Athens, Ohio, you're going, okay, the only agencies are in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Detroit,
Right.
Cleveland. Cleveland was a good agency town. So I decided, well, I want to go to Chicago. So I started just sending letters to ad agencies in Chicago. And back then, you'd send a letter and a week later you'd get a response. You'd send a letter and a week later you'd get a response. And all the responses were, thank you for your interest. No, thank you. Thank you for your interest. Not today. And I just found this, okay, this is not going to work. If this is, they want experience. I mean, how do you get experience in the ad agency business if and this is kind of before the whole idea of you need to intern in the agency business.
Right.
I work construction every summer to maximize my income, and never thought about interning at an ad agency. I never even thought there was an ad agency in Columbus, Ohio, for that matter. And long story short, there were a few, and so my backup plan was I should start sending letters and resumes to these agencies in Columbus, and that's what I did. And did start to get a little traction, got a couple of interviews, and then one day I was in the Beta House in Athens my senior year, and back then it was you had to call people on a phone, and somebody answered the phone at the Beta House, and they said, "Dahlen, you got a phone call." I ran and got the call, and he said, "Hey, we're J. Scott Advertising. You interviewed with us spring break. We're in Athens with the McDonald's franchisee. Can you get over to the OUN? It turns out we've got an offer for you." And I couldn't believe it. I threw on my suit, had a friend of mine drive me over to the OUN, went into the bar, which was really dark. That's what I remember. And he said, "We'd like to offer you a job as a field account executive in Columbus, working on the McDonald's business, and we're going to offer you $7,500 a year salary." And I'm like, okay.
Deal.
That stunned me because everybody was getting 11, 12 in a car, 13 in a car. Was a good job back then. But 7,500, I made 7,500 in the summers working construction.
Oh, wow.
But, I said, I'll take it. And he said, might get a company car in a couple months. We're working with McDonald's on that. I think, that's going to happen. And then, I took that job and started on the McDonald's business. And 6 months later, I got a call from an ad agency in Marion, Ohio. Never been to Marion, Ohio. It's an hour north of Columbus, from an agency that just won the Burger Chef business, which was a regional brand out of Indianapolis. And I went up to Marion to visit with Howard Swink Advertising. And at the end of the day, went down to the CEO's office, this huge office, brand new, beautiful building. It's like this agency in Marion, Ohio. I've never been to Marion. This beautiful building. All these people were walking around in jeans. They had it figured out long before, jobs at Apple. And so I'm like, this place is amazing. He goes, "We'd like to offer you a job to run this Burger Chef business." Now, I'd only been out of school for 6 months. He said, "So how much money are you making?" And I said, of course, I'm thinking, do I lie or do I tell the truth? And I had gotten my company car the week before. So I did get a company car. And they told me when they gave it to me that's worth $3,500 a year. And I'm like, okay, and I got a raise to $8,000. So I was doing the arithmetic, 8,000 plus 3,500. I'm making, about 14,000. He said, "We'll offer you 18,000. I'm like, all right.
Burger
And it
Chef
was just like, yeah. And he said, "You're going to be driving, so you can turn your miles in. You can lease any kind of car you want. And we'd like to go ahead and pay for half your membership to Marion Country Club." I'd never even been to a country club. It's like my life changed. So, I tell my students that story because I say, I know it's all about the money. It's all about the starting salary, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It should be about the opportunity. It should be about the fit. The money will come, the money will come. And John Mark does a nice job with my classes when he talks about money, don't chase the money, chase the opportunity.
He said on his episode of the podcast as well, which is great. And it, we don't have I wasn't working on the McDonald's account, but my first job in advertising, I took as an unpaid intern for the same reason. I was just out of school. It was right after, it was 2010. So we were sort of like coming out of the recession, but a lot of folks were still having a hard time getting a job. So I was working 2 jobs and I started my first advertising job as an unpaid intern, just hoping that it would turn into something more. And then a few weeks later, like, "Okay, we'll pay your gas." And I was like, "Okay, great." And then a few months after that, they paid me, I think I was making like $30,000 a year in 2010. Yeah. So it was like barely able to pay my bills, but I knew, or I hoped that would lead to something more and the money would follow. And then I started working in-house and then things started to work out. But had I just waited for that job that would pay me all of the money I was expecting to make, I don't know where I'd be.
I know. You're right. Exactly.
And you said something interesting that a lot of people just don't realize, especially when they're in college, that the end company, like McDonald's, for example, isn't the one that's building the advertising. They're not usually the ones building the strategy, right? They have an in-house team. But we talked to someone the other day who calls it the Avengers Initiative, which was really kind of clever. It's like all these individuals come together, all these different companies come together to deliver results. And even in the automotive world, a lot of automotive manufacturers, they're assemblers. They're a branding company, really. And they have all these other companies that come together to help deliver a solution. And when I was in college, I was like, oh, I need to work for Ford. I need to work for Nissan. And it's like, well, you don't. You can work in that industry, and there's 1,000 tangential companies that you can work with that can deliver the same type of value, and you can contribute to the same project.
I'll tell you what, in college, at OU, when I'm teaching this one course, 4,500, so management of promotions, the fourth piece. So I talk about all the tools that brands have to get their messaging out, and you would think that it's all about social media and it's all, and I try to just set that aside for the moment. Let's not get wrapped up in, TikTok. I mean, the device that the messaging goes out on, it's going to change by the time you graduate.
Yeah.
And then whoever you go to work for, if you decide to go into this business, they're going to train you as to what you need to know. So I try to stay away from people say, do you teach digital? What do you know about digital? And I talk about just the fundamentals, but it's really interesting when these students, these marketing majors, and marketing is taught in the business school and advertising is taught in the journalism school, which is bizarre, but that's the way it is in 75% of the colleges in America.
Mm-hmm.
So when I interviewed with the business school, I said, hey, I'd like to bring some advertising to the business school, to the marketing, since it's the largest line item typically in a marketing budget. Why wouldn't you teach advertising over here in the business school?
Sure.
So I start to get into the agency business with some of these juniors and seniors marketing, and they've taken research and they've taken marketing principles and they talk about product development and pricing and all that stuff. And when I start to talk about the advertising agency business, they're like, wait a second, I've never even heard about this.
Wow.
What is this? And I swear, you'd be surprised how many of them say, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
I thought I wanted to go into this part of marketing or this part of marketing or this part of marketing. I want to do this. And can you help me get into this business? And of course, it's still today a difficult business to get into, right? It's a small fraternity, if you will. But once you get in and you're good, as Lauren knows, the business will take care of you.
Why do you think it's so challenging? Why do you think it's hard to break into more than maybe some other industries?
Well, I just think that, typically, an agency is looking for productivity, not added cost. They're not looking for overhead. And so you bring in a college grad and you're looking at least for a period of time, overhead. You're adding to your overhead. They're going to generate zero income.
Right.
So if you're the president of an agency, whether you're owned by a holding company or you've got a board of directors that you're reporting to, you're constantly thinking and pushing down, we've got to increase our billing. We've got to reduce our costs. We've got to maximize our profits. So anytime you bring on a paid intern, or a college graduate, the productivity is going to take time. Doesn't mean that person's not going to be a superstar. It just means that for the short period of time, that's a cost. So we're adding to our cost. Yeah. Is that okay? Can we go ahead and hire Lauren? She seems to be bright. I think she's going to be great. But, for a while, we're going to just be paying her. She's not going to be generating any billing. Yeah. That's why, when I got in the agency business and I learned about timesheets, it was like, God, this is painful.
Hated it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, what project you're billing your time to that hour, that week, that month.
Yeah, and all the agencies, struggled with getting, you got to get your timesheets in because we got to do the billing. And if you don't turn your timesheets in, guess what? We're not going to give you your expense account check, or we're not going to get, you're not going to get a bonus, or you're not going to get this, or you're not going to be able to come to the Christmas party. So
you talk to students all the time. So you've been in the industry for so long. What has changed about the ad industry that's, surprised you over the years, or has it, or is it still pretty consistent?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I guess the overwhelming change is this whole digital transformation that, and I've been teaching 8 years, and I can go back to 2014. And while I think I can remember the numbers, when you looked at U.S. advertising spending, Lauren, I think it was like 70-30 traditional to digital.
Mm-hmm.
Still 70% back in 2014 was spent on the traditional side, TV, radio, outdoor, print. and the money was moving over to the digital side. But the whole smartphone thing was taking off, and just the whole digital opportunity was evolving and developing on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. So as that's continued to develop over the past 8 years, the money has continued to move over, right? And so now it's more like 70-30 digital to traditional,
Hmm.
just in the 8 years I've been teaching. I can remember when I said 70-30, traditional digital. So don't think, everything's digital, ladies and gentlemen. It's not. And then, 4 years later, it's like, okay, so, it's about 50-50, so it's still 50% on the traditional side, 50%. Now it's like, oh my God, it's just like all these kids, all they think about is their phones and maybe their laptops. And all the messaging that they ever see in their mind is it's on my phone. It's
Yeah.
coming on my phone, or maybe I'll see it on my laptop.
We've
Um,
we've experienced some really interesting things with that. One, it's like the attribution, right? So when you're on a digital platform, the attribution is there. That, to your point of, do I hire an intern or not? Because I don't know if the expense is worth it. On digital, you can almost see it immediately. It's
mhm.
like I can test something, and an hour and a half later, I can see, am I performing to my benchmark? Do I need to pull this campaign? Do I need to try something else? And then can I attribute that return on ad spend to this channel, this one, or this one? But Lauren always talks with her clients about that omni-channel strategy. So it's like, even though your one port of entry might be Instagram, they may have seen you in 10 other places, and all of that contributes to the overall experience, the overall journey, and the overall sale or the win for the end customer,
Yeah.
which is it's interesting. And I think people might discount that if they're just looking at the very microscopic. They don't think about the brand holistically.
Yeah.
And it also makes it harder to track, the journey as well. I think technology is getting better, so you can sort of attribute, your 7 points of your touch points with a brand, but it is
Yeah.
challenging, and then it's hard to justify that expense. And I think a lot of brands you're sort of seeing a pullback on digital ad spend too, because I think a lot of brands were putting in millions and millions of dollars, seeing the return, and then especially on social, the attribution so different that they weren't getting those returns on Facebook. A lot of
Mhm.
direct to consumer brands whose only real exposure to customers is through digital advertising, they're struggling to turn a profit, and so
Yeah.
it's challenging there.
This whole
So
measurement of advertising and advertising effectiveness has been an ongoing issue my
Hmm.
entire career. And I've been doing this since 76.
Hmm.
And, even though there's been progress, and when you move to the digital side, you're right, there's a lot of measurement systems in place that, weren't on the traditional side. I'm running, $100 million in TV advertising on network TV. Is it working? I guess my sales are going up. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know. So when I went to Nielsen, actually, it was called IAG Research when I first joined the firm in 2007 in New York City. And then we were bought by Nielsen 11 months after I got there.
Hmm.
But that idea, that firm was all about measuring effectiveness of TV advertising. And then, online advertising was coming on aggressively. So we were able to measure online advertising, and mobile also was coming on. So we were starting to measure mobile, and we would sell subscriptions to that research, and companies would pay us $750,000 a year for that
wow.
data. All and so the way they had the company set up was in sectors, business sectors. So I was the restaurant sector leader, and it was my goal to get all the top 25 chains to subscribe to our data.
Hmm.
And they had a website set up called rewardtv.com, and you'd go to that website, and they would pay you to watch TV, right? You get gift cards from Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts to watch TV, and then answer some questions. And they'd ask you questions about the shows to measure stickiness. Do you remember the beginning? Do you remember the middle? Do you remember the end of this show? And oh, by the way, did you see a car ad? Because we knew you saw a car ad. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. You remember what brand it was? Yeah, it was a Ford ad. You remember what the message was? As a matter of fact, I do. It was a new car. Did you like the ad? Yeah, I did. I thought it was really funny. Is it going to increase your purchase intent of a Ford when and if you go in the car business, or you need a car? Yes, as a matter of fact, that data was gold. And
Hmm.
we'd go around and we'd lay this out. And of course, we'd be able to go in and say, here's, your last 5 commercials. We've got the data on it because it was syndicated research, and it would just blow people away. I remember pitching to Papa John's in Louisville, and John Schnatter, the founder and CEO, was in the meeting. and we lay this out. We talk about the commercials that he's in, and we say, as a matter of fact, we've dissected this, John. We've looked at commercials where you're in the beginning of the commercial or just the end of the commercial, and the ones where you're in the beginning are much more effective than they are if you're just at the end. And he slammed his head. He said, "I told you guys." The agency was in there. He said, "We're going to buy this data. I don't care what it costs. And agency, I need to see new creative next week with me at the beginning, the middle, and the end." So measurement. Is it working? Is it working? We still don't know. And people are still wondering, is all this money we're spending in paid social, paid search, is it really working? I mean, I know we've got data that says that people are seeing it, that people are clicking through. Do we have the connectivity between all of that and our actual sales? I mean, we would try to analyze this data that we had at Nielsen, all the metrics I just took you through with sales. They'd give us their sales. Burger King, Papa John's, Domino's, Arby's. We had all those accounts, and they would give us, and we try to correlate all of it. It was mind-boggling,
We have an easier time doing that today, right? We've got some crazy data tools that are able to do it. And when you look at time series data like that, like sales data, and you're trying to correlate it back to an event, you got three components of that. And you have the trend over time. You have the seasonality, which can be like hourly even, but you have the seasonality, and then you have what's called exogenous variables. An exogenous variable might be, I ran an ad on a Tuesday, and then Wednesday I got sales. So you have to, like, the correlation between all those is interesting. And I think some people end up mistaking trend for exogenous or vice versa.
Yeah.
So being able to over time determine what is challenging. And I think one of the favorite ways that Lauren's done it is with holdout testing, right? It's like, it's painful, but if you want to see if something works, stop doing it.
Yeah.
And then you see pretty effectively.
Hey, when I was I was at Wendy's, from 82 to 86, when we went on TV, the franchisees expected sales to go up within 72 hours. If we started on Monday, you knew by Wednesday whether or not the campaign was working or not, so.
Well, speaking of those of campaigns with Wendy's, tell us about the Where's the Beef campaign and how you sort of played a major part in that.
So, I went there in 82, and in 82, thereabouts, Burger King launched what they called the Burger Wars back then. And they came out with a claim in their TV commercials where they said the Whopper is preferred to the Big Mac and the Wendy's single 2-to-1. And we were, running some soft bite and smile type advertising, we used to call it, people biting into our burgers and smiling, a lot of beautiful people having a beautiful time on the beach or at home or, in the backyard or in the convertible. And it was like, okay, this is not going to work. We got to take the gloves off here. This is serious. I mean, they're coming after us. So we retooled everything. We talked to the agency, which was Dancer Fitzgerald Sample, old New York City agency. Proctor agency. They had a lot of packaged goods business, but they were doing great work for us. And we said, we got to come up with a new campaign. We got to get aggressive about our burgers. We got to talk burgers. So 1983, that's all we talked about was burgers, burgers, burgers. We talked about fresh, not frozen. We talked about no heat lamps. We talked about made your way with the toppings you want. And we found this director in Chicago by the name of Joe Settlemeyer, who was doing these kind of unique, weird casting type commercials that were very funny, very memorable, and very effective. And he was working with all major brands. So our agency in New York aligned with Joe in Chicago, and we put together a year's worth of hamburger advertising, and it was a major hit. Our sales took off. It blunted Burger King's effort, at least on behalf of Wendy's. And our franchisees were ecstatic, and we were headed into 84, and we had momentum, and we're like, what are we going to talk about? We've talked about everything. We need to keep this hamburger campaign going. And so we were flying from Denver to Dallas one night, and I wrote on a legal pad, some hamburger restaurants camouflage their small hamburgers with big names. Just that's all it said on it was a big yellow pad, legal pad. And I ripped that off, and we were at the agency the next week in New York, and I pulled that out of my briefcase and I handed it to the account guy. I said, this is what we want to talk about in January. And that's when they came back with two commercials, old man commercial, old lady commercial. And they both said, where's all the beef? We got to Chicago to shoot. Joe Settlemeyer looked at all of us and said, do you mind if we just say, where's the beef instead of where's all the beef? We said, that sounds cool. And so that's what we did. And we put both those commercials on the air in January of '84. It was going to be for 4 weeks. Just normally we wouldn't go on the air in January, but we thought, let's keep this thing going because of the weather east of the Mississippi. It was just like, let's save the money. But this year, '84, we went on right from the get-go. And we went on with Old Lady, Old Man, Where's the Beef? And we thought 4 weeks, that's cool. Within 10 days, it was global. It had gone viral. Before, there was no such thing as viral back then, but this thing had gone not viral in the US or North America, but all over the world. And President Reagan was saying it to the Challenger astronauts. There was a presidential debate later in '84 where Mondale looks at Gary Hart and said, "Where's the beef?" It was on Johnny Carson. I mean, it was just everywhere you can think of. It was. And we were like rock stars. We had Where's the Beef lapel pins. Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's, he had to have a lapel pin on. He always carried lapel pins. So when you go to stores, he would just hand out, "Hey, here's a lapel pin." And so we had these Where's the Beef lapel pins, and especially flight attendants would look, they'd like look at it and go, "Oh, I'll give you 3 pins for that." Because the flight attendants back then maybe they still do, collected pins.
Wow.
And so it was really cool. And so we quickly, after 10 days, said, we got to do another commercial. So we flew to LA. I remember it was snowing like crazy in Columbus. We took the Wendy's jet from Columbus to St. Louis, and we were able to get out on the last flight out of St. Louis to LA. And we were in Marina del Rey the next day on a yacht producing this commercial. It was like we went from not going to be able to get there to on a yacht. It was outstanding. And that commercial ran for 6 weeks. That was a SS Big Bun. He was the owner of a hamburger restaurant on his yacht, and Clara finds him and says, "Where's the beef?" And then we did a Monday night football contest, Where's the Beef, with ABC Sports for the whole football season. And the thing was just out of control.
Well, what do you think resonated with people with that campaign?
Clara, the older lady, bless her heart, she was like everybody's grandmother.
Yeah.
And she was fighting, for her rights. And, hey, we want our money's worth. And, you're not giving it to us, but Wendy's is. And she was just a sweetheart. And so we got her out on the circuit, not only in the commercial, but we had her visiting and going to shows, and she was on every show, and people just fell in love with her. And the line, "Where's the beef?" and how she delivered it, also caught on. So it was the line, it was the message, which is, God, I didn't know Wendy's single had more beef than the Big Mac and the Whopper. That's pretty interesting. And it was the Clara herself. We had our convention that year. Every year we had our convention in Vegas, every other year in Vegas, and then we go somewhere else, Vegas, somewhere else. This was in Honolulu. So we flew Clara out to Honolulu, and at the beginning of the convention, there's 3,500 people in the auditorium, and they lit it so all you could see was the shadow of this little lady standing behind the curtain. And she just stood there for like, I don't know, several minutes, and the crowd was going crazy. And that curtain lifted up, spotlight on Clara going, "Where's the beef? And everybody was just going crazy. And we handed out, by the way, at that convention, 3,500 pins that said, "Where's the beef?" was my idea. So everybody was walking around. Which I've got a bag of those sitting over there. I'll send you guys a couple of those.
That'd be awesome. I'm kind of curious now. I'm like, I wonder what they go for on eBay. I wonder if that's like a piece of nostalgia that goes for something. And it's amazing that something you wrote down on a legal pad. Mm-hmm. You thought, okay, this is going to be something. This is the next generation or the next iteration of what we're going to do. But you probably never intended it to be iconic. 10 things, one thing that you wrote down on a legal pad ended up becoming a global phenomenon for years that people still talk about now and end up being taught in schools.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, it really is. And these kids today, my students today, they don't know where's the beef. Although Wendy's has tried to bring it back, recently a little bit, but they still don't know it. So when I talk about it, I say, you ask you tell your parents and you tell your grandparents that, and they'll come back to me and say, "Hey, I was telling my parents," and they're like, "Oh my God, that's a great campaign."
So let's talk about the transition you made from agency side to client side. So what did you like better? And 2, how did that feel for you when you were on the one side of the table versus the other side?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was at Needham, Harper and Steers, now DDB, in Dayton, Ohio, and we were part of the New York division. We had the Frigidaire account. Frigidaire was based in Dayton at the time, and so I went to Needham Harper Steers in Dayton to work on the Frigidaire business and account management. And the client there was a guy by the name of Jim Huey, who was a national ad manager. He had also worked in New York in the agency business, so he had agency and client side, and he was a great guy. He became a mentor to me. And he was like my dad's age, so he was like a father figure to me. And he always said to me, "Hey, someday, you may have an opportunity to shift from the agency side to the client side." He said, "I did that, and you should do it but it has to be the right client. You don't want to go work for a number 4, number 5, number 6 brand in a category. It's painful." He says, "You don't want to do that. But if you can get to go to work for a really high profile brand in a category, take the opportunity." So I was on Frigidaire for 3 years, did real well. I got promoted to VP at Needham. I was able to go to New York City and work with our New York people without having to live there, which was kind of cool. And lo and behold, a guy that I work with on the McDonald's business called me and said, "Hey, listen, I just got promoted here at Wendy's. There's a national ad manager job open. Would you be interested?" So I drove from Dayton to Columbus. I met with him. I met with the CMO. Was called EVP marketing back then, a guy by the name of Bill Welter, who is a Chicago guy, worked for Burnett. And they offered me the job right then. So I remember going back to Dayton and going to lunch the next day with Jim Huey. And I said, "Jim, you're not going to believe this, but I've been offered this job at Wendy's." And he said, take it.
Wow.
We're going to miss you. I love you like a son, but you got to take this job. And it's weird. I took the job, and then Frigidaire was sold to White Consolidated, and they moved their offices to Columbus. And so he moved to Columbus, and he would meet me at a bar periodically across from Wendy's and get updates from me on how things were going. So it's almost like he, followed me around.
Yeah.
It was weird, but that's how that happened. That was my first client side job, and I loved it. Wendy's was a great brand, obviously a great brand, a local brand. Started in Columbus. I remember going to the first Wendy's with my dad in downtown Columbus, and they were just on fire. So it was a brand on the move. It was a brand that clearly was considered to be the best tasting hamburger nationally of any chain. There's some regional chains that maybe would rank a little bit higher, whether it's In-N-Out or somebody in Texas, but nationally, nobody came close to Wendy's in terms of taste and likability and things like that we measured. And so it was a great opportunity. And, I was there, as you know now, for not very long until the burger wars hit. And, it seemed like everything kind of blew up. And then we were able to respond to that in a very favorable way. And it was a great run. I hated to leave Wendy's, but, I was recruited aggressively back into the agency business by a guy by the name of Smoot Falgren, who had a number of offices in the Midwest, Falgren offices, and they had McDonald's regionally. They were a big McDonald's agency. So he had bought that agency that I went to work for in Marion, Ohio. So those guys I still stayed in touch with, and they're like, "Hey, Dan, Smoot Falgren's coming to town," and their offices were literally 5 minutes from Wendy's corporate office. And Smoot wants to meet you, and can you meet us for lunch? And Smoot's this old, West Virginia, check your wallet when he leaves because he's probably going to steal it. And but a super charming guy, and obviously wildly successful. And he put together a deal I couldn't say no to, and so I
You
left
went
Wendy's.
back to the agency world, you said.
Back to the agency business, yeah.
Is it hard to go back to the grind?
It was, because I was with a global brand that was on the move, and now all of a sudden I'm working with some national brands. We had some national brands in Columbus out of the Falgren office, but also some regional brands, and then some kind of early on brands, and it was like, I'm missing my $100 million ad budget that I was responsible for.
Yeah.
Now we're pitching $3 million, $4 million, $5 million accounts, which are great accounts back then, but it was just like, it's not the same. It's like going from the NFL back to college,
Yeah.
But
So
I loved it. I loved Smoot, and I became very close, and then that led to me getting and then they, Smoot sold the agency to IPG in New York City. And I met some IPG guys in Detroit, Campbell Ewald, big Chevy agency, and they sent me to Los Angeles to run Campbell Ewald in LA, and they had the Princess Cruises account. So, it worked out.
It's
But
it's interesting how just like random decisions, random
yeah.
chance interactions can just completely change and shift your life. And you
Oh,
mentioned, going back to college, so that's probably a good segue into the present of you are a professor now and you run a branding agency. So let's talk about those really quickly. So how do you like college life, being a professor, teaching students, shaping the next generation of people in the field, and running that agency?
yeah. So I'll start with the agency piece. I mean, it just seems like it's a continuation of what I've been doing forever.
Hmm.
So I love it. I'm pretty good at it. I've got a handful of clients. I could probably have two handfuls, but I don't have the time. And I love sitting with, clients like you guys, you guys know what I'm talking about, and helping them solve their problems,
Yeah.
regardless of what that entails. If that requires us to, do social media postings, we'll do it. If that requires some paid digital, we'll do it. If that requires an outdoor board, we just put up an outdoor board on I-71 for a client. They're ecstatic. They love it. Then we'll do it, whatever it takes. So I love that. And, I've got that daily. So if for some reason I wake up and go, oh, I don't have class today, I don't have anything to do. Yes, you do. You've got four clients that are relying on you to come up with ideas to drive, traffic to their restaurants, their bars, whatever the case may be. So I love that. But, I started guest lecturing when I was in New York at, what became Nielsen. And there was a journalism professor who had found me and said, hey, would you come down to Athens and speak to the ad association? So I did that. And it was like, it worked out great. He said, can you come back? Can you speak to my classes? So one thing led to another, and he and I developed this relationship where I was going back to Athens pretty regularly to speak to classes, to organizations, things like that. And I found myself flying back to New York and telling my wife, gosh, I really enjoyed my time in the classroom. These students were like, and this professor said to me, oh my God, I've never seen my students so excited, so animated, they really, liked you, they really liked what you had to say. They really liked your stories. So I thought, well, maybe someday I could teach, whether it's at NYU if we're here in New York, or if we move to Ohio, maybe there's colleges all over Ohio, or if we move to Los Angeles, where my wife is from, there's certainly plenty of colleges out there. Thinking way in the back of my mind, but I only have an undergrad. Don't you need like a master's to teach college? Don't you need a PhD? I think I thought you needed a PhD, to be honest with you. So I'd have to go back to school forever to do that. Forget that. That's not going to happen. So then I remember, going down there and talking to the professor about, what does it take to do this? He said, well, you need to have a master's. So, but you could apply, get accepted into our master's program and teach. You can start teaching as a GA, right? I'm like, okay, that's cool. Never thought of that. So I had to take the GRE to get accepted into the journalism school, and you also needed that to get accepted into the business school, MBA or Masters of Sports Administration. And so I ended up getting job offers at both. I got accepted into both. And, both included a GA ship, if you will, so I could start teaching in both. So I opted for the College of Business, even though I was a journalism guy. I opted for the College of Business for a variety of reasons. And I'm glad I did. It's worked out. It's worked out great. So, and that experience, now 8 years long, has been incredibly rewarding. There's nothing like a client calling you up going, hey, Dan, the agency, you guys have hit it out of the park. Our sales are up, our profits are up, our CEO, our shareholders, they love the ads. Thank you. That phone call or winning an account, hey, Dan, we've decided to go with your agency. I mean, it's nothing like it. But to have a student send in an evaluation, says, you're the best professor that I've ever had in the 4 years I've been here. This is the best class. I've learned more in this class than I've learned, my whole college career. Or I just accepted a job with an ad agency or a digital agency in Austin. Or 3 years down the road, them saying, I just got promoted to director of advertising, or me picking up my New York Times on Sunday, which I always read. And there's an ad, full page ad for Fair Harbor. and the head of advertising is a former student of mine.
Oh.
And here he is in the New York Times. Now, this is a company who makes products from plastic water bottles.
Mhm.
Um, and he's a digital guy. He started with a big ad agency in Austin, GSD&M, great agency, but then met a guy that had just started a Facebook ad agency. They just did Facebook ads. He took that job. One thing led to another. He helped grow it. They were bought, and then he was offered this big job at
Wow.
Fair Harbor. So that, man, I'll tell you, that is just incredibly rewarding.
Hmm.
And if I had to getting that client call saying, "Hey, the ads you guys came up with are really working. Thank you very much," or a student going, seeing that ad in the New York Times, man, I'll tell you, I don't know.
Well, you're
It's big.
changing lives, you're helping people
Yeah,
get on the first step into their career
that's
and
right.
hopefully doing something great with it. And it sounds like for many students, that's what you've done, which is incredible.
Well,
Um,
thank you, and that's a very good point. Very good point. Changing lives, and it's one thing to drive people into McDonald's, right?
yeah.
And get them to come in. McDonald's was like, bring them in, trade them up, bring them back. Bring them in, trade them up, bring them back. That was the culture that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And it was just like, drive sales, same store sales. What are our sales? Sales, sales, sales. But you're right. To have somebody say, and then to be invited to their weddings,
Oh
and then
gosh,
to get
yeah.
their pictures of their first children. I mean, it's special.
I'm definitely not surprised you're leaving an impression because I think just from the stories that you've told us, they're so interesting. I know the folks who listen to our podcast are going to be interested, but I
Okay.
am curious to know, you speak what you interact with students all the time. So what advice would you give to, let's say we have some students listening today, some kids who are maybe just trying to get their first job. What should they do? What should they do to help them stand out, maybe differentiate from the other
Sure.
applicants?
What I do the last week of every class is I have this thing I call 5 to Thrive. 5 things that I would do if I were you, based on
Hmm.
my 45 years of experience of doing things right and doing a lot of things wrong. If I can help you avoid some of the things I've done wrong, then that's a win for me. The first thing is that you have to treat your health as your number one priority,
Hmm.
because with good health you have hope, and with hope you're rich. So much of what I hear in the hallways and in the classrooms is about money, 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 starting salary, starting salary. And I get that, man. I get that. I don't want to live at home. I want to have my own apartment. I want to have a nicer car. I want to be able to go on vacation. I get that. But all that, as John Mark says, will come if you do everything else right. But if you move that to the top of your priority list, trust me, from experience, you're going to go sideways. It's going to
Yeah.
get you going sideways, and you're going to lose track or control of the more important things. So health, is absolutely critical. First impression, last impression. You've heard that cliche: first impression, a lasting impression. So pre-pandemic, I talked a lot about interviews and firm handshakes and eye contact. And I can't tell you, if you didn't give me a firm handshake when I interviewed you, or you didn't give me eye contact throughout that handshake, and then got up at the end of the interview and did the same thing, chances are I wasn't going to hire you.
Yeah.
Chances are, even if you had maybe a slightly better resume or a little bit better experience, there's something about that. I have to have that. So I recommend to all my students, be sure to do it. You don't need to break their hand. And we're getting back to handshaking again, I guess. But man, that handshake's got to be there, and that eye contact's got to be there. Take handwritten notes and ask lots of questions. Take handwritten notes. Do you mind if I take notes? Do you mind if I take a few notes? No, go ahead. That immediately lifts you up
Hmm.
among the other 5 people, 10 people, 15 people we're talking about. Um, Become a ferocious reader. Um, John Mark, we talk about John Mark. I mean, he's got his executive team reading a book a month. There's a reason for that. There's a reason that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates read endless amounts of books. It's a way to continue your learning. So once you leave school, if you don't read, you don't learn. And so I tell my students, you might not be a ferocious reader today, but become one tomorrow. Start tomorrow. If you never read anything, read something. If you only read a book a year, read 2 a year. If you only read a book every 3 months, read two, and you just become
Baby
ferocious.
steps. Yeah.
And Audible makes that easy, like audiobooks that can
Totally.
get your foot in the door
Yes.
now.
Talk about that. I talk about getting horizontal. So many people are vertical. Hey, I want to be in a PR. I want to work for a PR agency. I've got 8 years of PR experience. I've got 8, internships. I read PR books. My dad's in PR. My mom's in. To me, that's like, okay, that's great. That's very vertical. Were you ever an Uber driver?
Right.
Did you ever deliver pizza? I mean, tell me something other than that, that you did. So I love people to get horizontal with something. So I strongly encourage that. Be curious, ask questions. We talked about that earlier, and just keep your priorities clear. And I talked about health being at the top. Family's got to be right there behind it. So if you got health and family and a hobby, then your job. That's the way it should be. Even though you spend a disproportionate amount of your time on your job, you have to have health. You have to get up and move, do something. And you have to, when I talk about health, I'm talking spiritual, financial, I'm talking, just spiritual, financial, mental health. You got to have all those working. And if you have your priorities straight as that fifth thing to thrive, you're gonna be in great shape. I personally to say, I didn't have it that way. I didn't have my priorities set up that way. I had my job at the top and chasing money at the top. That threw me off, and that threw me into some really bad places, dark places that I'm not proud of. And so
We have
now that I've
similar
got
experiences.
now that I've got
that.
my priorities straight, life's a lot easier. Life's a lot better, and everything's worked out. So
What's really interesting is we always ask the question, what advice would you give when you're 20 to your 25-year-old self? And we had never seen a duplicate answer before.
Yep.
And then back to back, like 3 in a row, it became like being present, appreciating things as it was happening. Right. It became the number one answer. It was just like, bam, bam, bam. We had never had a duplicate before. So it was kind of interesting. So I think the answer you just gave is probably the advice you would give to yourself when you're 25 or 18, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. There'd be, the advice would be, be 5 things, but I guess if I had to boil it down to one, it would be the priority piece. It'd be getting your priorities straight, health at the top, family, hobby, and then job and money, and
Awesome advice.
don't let that creep up, because it's not necessary. Because if you do all those other things right, you take care of your health, you take care of your family, and you have something that keeps you, interested outside of work. Your job, you're going to be great at your job. You're going to be wildly successful. You're going to make all the whatever you want to make. If those priorities are right.
I think it's awesome. It's great advice. And I think to that point, you talked about being a ferocious leader. And our kind of the last question we like to wrap up on is, what media would you suggest people read right now? What books are you reading? What podcasts are you listening to? What are the top of the list right now that you think someone should hit?
Yeah, I really listen to one primary podcast, which is CMO Moves.
Yeah.
CMO Moves. I think we talked about that, but every time I think I needed to start listening to a different podcast, I hear from somebody on that one that just inspires me. I learn something from. So these CMOs that they interview are wildly successful people. Many of them, have traveled, different routes. A lot of them have started in the agency business and found their way to the client, what we call the client side, and they've done very, very well. And they talk about what gets them there, and so I find that to be really current and really full of great information. So what I do is periodically I'll have my students listen to one of those and write a report. And 9 times out of 10, the students say, "Wow, that was great! Wow, I really enjoyed listening to that podcast." I mean, they never even heard of CMO Moves. They never thought about listening to that podcast. The farewell of the Facebook marketing guy, Lucio, whatever his name is, from the last 40 years. It's a great podcast. It's a great episode. If you haven't heard that, he does a really nice job. In terms of books, I read a lot of business books. This is a great book Kellogg on branding. Strongly recommend this. I recommend this on the first day of class to all of my students. It's just obviously the Kellogg people are top notch, best in the business. This is their first book on branding. I think it's outstanding. This is a book that you guys are familiar with that our friend
Oh,
sent
that's
to me.
great.
Can't hurt me. I listen. I follow Goggins on social media and watch him running and shouting at all of us and telling us what to do. But this book puts all of that in perspective. I think it's a great read, and it's important, and I think it puts, as I said, just a lot of things in perspective. I can show you my computer sitting on a stack of 5 marketing textbooks, all of which I've read. So to be honest with you, a lot of my reading time as a professor is spent, not that I'm a big textbook guy, because it's kind of like the days of textbooks are kind of over because they're not invariably kind of dated,
Yeah.
and in marketing and advertising, and things are changing, as you guys know, by the hour. So it takes textbooks years to catch up. But I find myself contacting all 3 major publishers all the time, especially in the summer, and saying, "What do you got? What do you got? What do you got?" And so I've got 3 new textbooks that I received this summer that I've already read.
Wow.
And I've got a textbook company, a publisher after me to write a textbook. My wife keeps saying, "What are you waiting for?" And it's a commitment.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of detail, but so that might be something you might find me trading some of my reading time with writing.
And if you want us to read that and proofread it to see where you're at on it, let us know,
Yeah.
because we would
Okay.
be absolutely thrilled to run
Yeah,
through it.
I would love to do that.
take you
But
up on that.
Dan, we're running up on time and we don't
Yeah,
want to take up any more of your time. We should probably do this again because the number of stories you have are really amazing, really outstanding, and we really, really appreciate hearing them. We just want to thank you again. We're really grateful that you took the opportunity to
sure.
spend some time with us today. Loved hearing your 5 points at the end. Really loved hearing the story as you transitioned from the agency life through client life to a professor, and then all the lives you've changed along the way. So again, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate having you on. We can't wait to talk to you again in the future.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Lauren. Enjoyed it very much, and look forward to maintaining close contact with you guys.
Same
Likewise.
for us.